Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it another minute because it's like popcorn popping as people continue to join. So we'll start in maybe just a minute.
And Barry, where are you this fine day?
I am outside of Chicago in Evanston. And where do we find you in your travels, Heidi?
I'm in the seaport in Boston, so looking out over the harbor and the impending storm that's brewing and coming our direction.
Oh dear, I travel tomorrow to Boston. So,
well, I'm sorry I'll miss you. I'm traveling tomorrow to London, I think.
Okay.
But I'll wave to you from the airport.
There we go. We'll see each other at Logan. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. A partner once confided in me. She didn't want to include a new Lateral partner to help with some client work because she didn't want to screw up the client relationship that was so important to her career. I learned in my career that integrating Lateral lawyers, either as individuals joining the firm or as part of a larger merger, can be a challenge. My name's Barry Solomon. I'm with Lateral, and we're happy that you're joining us for this first of 3 workshops on different aspects of smarter collaboration. This first one is called Smarter Collaboration to Optimize Lateral Hiring and Mergers. And as we begin the webinar, please go ahead and send any questions via chat. I will interrupt Heidi as appropriate if there are any questions. And we're going to be recording this webinar and we'll be sharing it with all of you. I first learned about Heidi when I was CMO at Sidley Austin years ago. Her research about the collaboration within law firms helped us motivate change at our firm because she provides facts and data to support efforts to encourage lawyers to take the needed time to learn more about each other and develop the trust necessary for smart collaboration. It's such a personal privilege for me to introduce Heidi to all of you. Now, you may already know her from her best-selling book, Smart Collaboration: How Professionals and Their Firms Succeed by Breaking Down Silos. I recommend it to those who haven't already read it. For those like me who have read it, I recommend Heidi's new book, which is due out in November, but it's available now for pre-order. It's called Smarter Collaboration, hence the title of our series of webinars. Smarter Collaboration, a new approach to breaking down barriers and transforming work. Both of these books are published by Harvard Business Press. Speaking of Harvard, Heidi is a distinguished fellow at Harvard Law School and previously a professor at Harvard Business School. She's currently the faculty chair and instructor of multiple executive education programs at both Harvard Law School and Business School. So Heidi works right at that intersection between the business and practice of law. She's been recognized multiple times. My personal favorite, she's a next generation business guru, as named such by Thinkers 50, but instead of going on and on about Heidi, let's give her time to talk. So please join me in virtually welcoming our speaker, Heidi K. Gardner. Heidi?
Well, thank you, Barry. Thanks for such a warm welcome, and a warm welcome to all of you as well. I am really excited to be able to share some of this information with you today. I hope to make it as much of a dialogue as possible because, as Barry said, we do have this new book coming out, and I've just gotten the page proofs a couple of days ago, and it's really exciting to actually see it coming together as an actual book. And yes, as Barry said, it is available now for pre-order, so go on to your favorite online retailer, and I won't mention any names, but whichever one you like best, or we always encourage people to go on to the indies as well. So here's what we are talking about today. So hiring smarter, how to use collaboration, really smarter collaboration, to get the best value from laterals and create the best experience from them. This is not simply how to exploit your laterals as much as you can. It is a mutual benefit. How do you create the kind of experience where people not just feel welcomed into your firm, but feel integrated? They're not just onboarded, but they are a part of the fabric of what is making your firm special, is bringing the greatest value to clients, they probably had a reason, and I hope it is more than money, because frankly, if you're out there just buying a Lateral and their Rolodex, there's a very good chance that you're going to be saying goodbye to that Rolodex and that partner in a couple of years' time, let's be honest. So you need to have some really compelling reasons why people are joining your firm. Those compelling reasons should be their new partners and the client base that they can serve by joining forces with their new partners. So how do you make that experience really hum for those new people who are joining? And like Barry said, despite the enormous amount of money and attention and time and effort that you put into bringing the right people on board, there is some friction and resistance occasionally from some of your incumbent partners. So we're going to be talking about how to smooth that out and make everyone feel like they are part of this solution. Now, some of you have either recently gone through some kind of combination activity or are considering it. So, by combination, we mean a merger in the classic sense of two different firms combining, or it could be a larger scale, somewhere larger scale than just the onesie, twosie lateral hiring, but not the acquisition or merger of two complete firms. So right now we're seeing, as you well know, a very hot talent market, and we're seeing groups of people, lift outs from one firm to another. And so we're going to be talking about how do you make the most of those kinds of combinations? How do you uncover opportunities for smarter collaboration before and after that combination to make integration more productive? And Q&A at any point, completely welcome. Like Barry said, use the Q&A function to get your questions in here. And I don't consider it an interruption at all. I consider it a dialogue. So chapter 5 of the new book is where we are drawing all of this new information from. We've got case studies, as you'll see in just a moment, as well as new research and data on the how-tos. How do you actually make this happen as smoothly as possible? And we've got a couple of steps here for you. We have lots of advice. We tried to generate a step-by-step guide, a really practical roadmap for making lateral hiring better. And what I selected, since we can't get into the entire book with you today, or even this entire chapter, with my team, we selected a few of the how-to points to cover today that we think are either less well adopted in law firms today, or might be new to some of you. Now, this one, I don't know, does it sound obvious to you? It feels to me like it's one of those obvious points that absolutely no one really does, which is hold partners, your incumbent partners, your existing partners, accountable for the success of the new hires. You want people to be able to agree to statements like this, like, I see how this new partner helps to strengthen my practice. Is it clear to everyone? So it's not just enough to say, hey, we've got Christine or Sam or Samin joining, and we're really excited to have this new partner and their specialty is XYZ. No, what you need to really get people to articulate is, how is Christine's entry going to make every partner better at what they do? That takes some real time and effort, sometimes, one-on-one conversations, and making sure that everyone is not just welcoming in a passive sense, but eager for this person to join and thinking about how to create opportunities for the new joiner such that everyone benefits. And you want people to have a plan, not just good intentions. Like there's, 1,000 scholars out there these days researching consumer behavior, right? So people in the marketing fields, et cetera. And what we have long known is that there is a very wide gap between intentions and actions. So in consumer research, there's so much activity trying to measure what is it that converts somebody that says, yes, I intend to buy a new car, this flavor of jam, you name it, and getting them to actually walk into the showroom of the grocery store and pick the thing off the shelf or drive away with it. Massive gap there. What does it take to close the gap between intentions and actions? And what we know is that the more specific the plan is, the more likely it is to happen. So it's not just getting somebody to say, yes, I intend to go buy a jar of jam. It's, I'm going to buy this brand, this flavor at this store on my way home from work today. What's the equivalent that you can do for all of your incumbent partners when there's a new joiner, a lateral hiring? Thinking about a statement like, I will include this new joiner in meetings with client A and B within the first 3 months. Okay, that's pretty specific because you've named some clients. Can you get even more specific? Can you say on this and that topic, because Samina's joining and he's an expert in this thing, I know that my client A has a real gap there. We're going to make that conversation happen between Samina, our new partner, and this particular person at the client. That's what I mean by making it as specific and concrete as possible. Then there's the accountability piece. Somebody has to believe that their own KPIs are based on this new partner's success in that first year. That is a leap that very few firms are seeing as far as I'm aware. So holding somebody's feet to the fire, saying you advocated to bring in a partner who's an expert in this topic because your sector, your practice group really needed somebody who was a product liability litigator, da, 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 da. Okay, we found that person, we invested, we're hiring that person. Now you're on the hook to make sure they're successful. What are you going to do about it? Having people with true accountability for the new person's success, it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare. A lot of times what we see is a sink or swim environment where the new person joins and it's frankly up to them to prove themselves. Not the best way to get people on board. Because here's what we know. I think some of you probably have seen this data before. Now let's talk about that how-tos. What we know is that when somebody enters the company, enters the firm as a new joiner, within the first 6 months, they need 2 things to actually happen. One is to be brought into the core client work. So it's not enough just to say, I hope they get involved in some of the clients. They have to actually be integrated, whether it's through a pitch or through actual billable hours in those first 6 months. And they have to get support from their new colleagues into work that they've brought with them. Now, we know that, if you can do this at one client, at a second client, client A is where it's the incumbent firm and the new partner is brought in by one of their partners to say, hey, listen, let's have that meeting. Let's pitch together. Let's at least get them to understand what you do that adds value and why being part of our firm makes even more sense for everyone. Right? That's client A. Client B is the new joiner saying, hey, I've brought client B relationship along with me. We can deepen and broaden that relationship far more now that I'm part of this new firm. How do you make both of those happen? You cannot let 1,000 flowers bloom and just serendipitously hope that this occurs. You really have to have a plan in place to make that happen. What we know is if that reciprocal collaboration is happening, I get involved in your kind of work, you bring me into yours. If that is happening, what we know is at the 2-year mark, then this will have expanded to client C and D and E and F. That new joiner will be integrated and productive. They're going to remain with your firm. And by the way, at the 2-year mark is probably when the ROI turns positive, right? So losing people before that, for example, if they haven't had both of those kinds of reciprocal collaboration opportunities, chances are very high that they're going to be gone at the 2-year mark, or at least going to be isolated and less productive. So how is it that you're thinking about very specific clients such that then that builds on itself and you actually create a great experience for the new hire? Involving clients here is really important. It's not just something that you do to the clients, it's getting them on board. Sometimes the very best firms, I haven't seen a lot of law firms do this, to be honest, but in some of the consulting firms that I work with, they are very directive in getting clients engaged before somebody even joins, or at least on day one. Once they know that somebody is in the door, they've got their laptop, they're branded as part of this consultancy, the clients are in the wings waiting and eager to meet them, and they feel like the clients feel like they are partly on the hook for helping make this person successful. Clients will feel really invested in your new joiner's success to the extent that they have some kind of shared interest. They are hoping that your firm fills out a gap in expertise or fills out some other kind of gap, for example, a diversity gap. And they might say, hey, we are really interested in bringing more people of this type into our work with you in this firm. Let's figure out how to make it a success. And having those explicit conversations is really important as early as possible. Do your partners feel equipped and accountable for having those kinds of conversations? So here are a few other ideas. I'm building on some research by Professor Rob Cross. He's a very well-known professor at Babson College here in the Boston area. And he did some great research showing that when people come into a new organization, they need to create pull for themselves. It's really hard. And here's the mistake I think a lot of law firms make. They create the kind of opportunities for those new hires to go out and push themselves into client relationships or kind of push themselves onto other partners. My question to you is, what are you doing to create pull for the new hires? Because Professor Cross's research shows that that pull, the getting people excited about them and creating these opportunities that people understand what they bring and how it adds value, that is a much more likely way, because think about it, it's a multiplier effect. You could get a dozen, 50, 100 partners in your firm right now excited to bring this person in. That kind of multiplier effect is so much more powerful than having the one new joiner go out and try to insert themselves wherever possible. So think about how you're creating those sorts of environments. The second piece here is around incentives. I said it before, you've got to have accountability for how it is that people understand their role and their responsibility for making a new hire successful. Build it into people's performance management plan, build it into their KPIs, build it into the comp memo and the comp process. Incentives here really matter, and it has to be more than do the right thing. It has to be really specific. Now, networking events are really important. I think especially for new joiners who have come into this hybrid working environment where they may have had fewer opportunities to meet other people face to face. And all of the work, I'll be posting probably tomorrow on LinkedIn about a great new book that I've read, The Future of Work. It talks about how the new hybrid working environment is absolutely here to stay and gives 1,000 reasons why we are not always going to be all back in the office. I completely buy in, and that's a really practical book to read. And at the same time, it's clear that the face-to-face environment does, after millennia of human interactions, still matter. Networking events, I'm talking here about the kind of social events where people can get to know each other on a more personal basis. It helps to create trust. Now, in the intro, Barry mentioned an experience he had when there was a partner who confided her reservations about bringing a new joiner into a client relationship because if I remember correctly, Barry, you were saying something like, I'm afraid I'm going to screw up this client relationship. That to me suggests that there's something going wrong in the hiring process where people aren't 100% convinced of the trustworthiness of a new partner's capabilities. Right? Because in my work and my research, I differentiate between competence trust and interpersonal trust. Competence trust is the belief that somebody's going to deliver super high quality, their technical legal chops are superior to so many people's in the market. You can absolutely count on them to deliver. That's crucially important. Without it, nobody's going to bring that person into a client relationship. And what I'm talking about right now, the networking and the social piece, is important for building the other kind of trust, character trust or interpersonal trust. Something about getting together and spending a little bit of more relaxed time allows us to connect with somebody and understand their intentions, their integrity. That really matters. How are you creating those kinds of opportunities for people who have joined in a remote or hybrid environment to spend time with others in a more relaxed setting? Psych safety. You're probably familiar with this term. It was originated, or at least it was popularized, I will say, by one of my colleagues at Harvard Business School, Amy Edmondson. And Amy, early on, understood the importance of this concept of psychological safety because she was studying, of all things, emergency room teams and operating teams. And what she found is that patient outcomes, I mean, we're talking life and death here, patient outcomes were considerably higher in surgical teams where there was psychological safety. That means people on the team had the ability to admit mistakes so that everyone could learn from them, to challenge one another if there was something that was going wrong and they had a better idea for how to fix it, for asking for help. All of those attitudes, the belief that I'm going to be safe to speak up in those ways, those are the responsibility of leaders in the firm. And by leader, I mean anyone who wears the partner title is a de facto leader in a law firm. So everyone has to create the environment of psychological safety where people can speak up. So how does this relate to hiring? Well, first of all, you need to have the kind of place where, like Barry was talking about, somebody admits that they have some reservations about, a new joiner. That you might not like to hear it, but you definitely want to hear it. If somebody has those kinds of reservations, it leads you to think about what went wrong in the system. Are you actually hiring the wrong people? Do you have a process that doesn't truly vet them? If you're convinced that the process is right and you're hiring the correct people and they actually are trustworthy on a competent sense, what's getting in the way of other people understanding that? And so those kinds of questions, again, you might not like hearing them, but it's far better to hear about them. How are you creating the kind of environment where people will approach you and let you know that they've got some reservations? You also want the new joiner to feel like it's safe, to ask for help, to ask the awkward question, to raise issues if there's something that comes up in a cultural sense that makes them hesitate or they feel like they're not getting involved and integrated. How are you creating the sort of environment where people can and will speak up? Psych safety is really crucially important. And by the way, if you're not very familiar with some of these concepts I'm talking about, I will be happy to pull together a sort of for further reading list. And it's not just my work. I'm, have a lot of respect for other scholars in the field. I will point you in the direction of some of this really important reading that you can do to understand the how-tos behind some of what I'm talking about. Now, I've just put up the word stories. Every anthropologist will tell you that culture is made of stories. So what kinds of stories are you propagating about the new hire? Are you giving them the opportunity to have some early successes? And then are you popularizing those stories and letting people know about the success? It's crucially important to create pull for these new hires to help spread their reputation, their good reputation, let people know what they're brilliant at and how they're adding value to clients. And then what do you have in place to make sure these stories spread quickly? Now, it sounds pretty straightforward. In the days that we're living in, the TikTok world and everything else, that videos carry a lot more energy and a lot more weight in the imagination than, say, an email story. Do you have the platform set up so that new hires can, in 30 seconds, introduce themselves and talk about something that they have done already inside the firm? Or even better, have them join up with somebody who, if they've done a joint pitch together, have the two partners, the new one and the incumbent, on a 30-second video saying, here's what we did together, here's how we combined our differentiated expertise into something unified, and here's the client reaction to it. They were delighted to know that we've now got somebody inside our firm capable of doing this. It's pretty straightforward. We're not talking high production value here. We're talking, pulling out your phone and doing a 30-second video and then having the platform to post it. Really crucial that you help people generate those stories. And then the last piece I'll tell you about is psychometric tools. So over the last year and a half or so, we've developed and started using in a whole variety of different firms and companies from board level through partner level, even occasionally with associates and sometimes between partners and their clients. we have something called the Smart Collaboration Accelerator. It's a form of a psychometric tool. People take an online 10-minute self-assessment, and it helps them understand some of their natural tendencies. It shows them where their real strengths are when it comes to collaboration, and it also raises their awareness of some blind spots that they have. What are some of the things they need to watch out for? When is it that a tendency that they may overplay turns into a weakness? Now, this is a fabulous tool for helping integrate new hires. Think about this. Imagine you've got a partner that you've joined up, a partner that you've hired. They're joining in, I don't know, the M&A group. How much easier would it be for everyone to develop trust in each other if people didn't just know what this person knows? Okay, yeah, they're an M&A lawyer. They are specifically working in energy transformation. They're working in, environmental resource companies, and they handled this part of the deal or this. So it's everything about what they know. And then where the psychometric tool comes in is, here's how they operate. The psychometric tool would allow people who are already in the M&A group to say, oh, hey, look, this is somebody who's coming in. They're a big ideas person. In our tool, they'd be labeled as a complex thinker. There's somebody who loves to solve puzzles. There's somebody who thinks abstract, big picture, visionary, right? That would be good. You'd say, wow, if we're really thinking about, energy transition, energy transformation for some of our clients, this person's going to be out on the kind of bleeding edge of what does that actually mean? What's the future look like? Or maybe the tool would show up that they're a real concrete thinker. Hey, this is somebody who takes those big ideas and goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's what it is that we need to do. We're going to go out to clients. We're going to put this kind of action plan in place. We're going to make these sorts of connections. Here's how we're going to get this thing up and running. Complex thinkers, concrete thinkers, they're very different from one another. How do you know who this new joiner is and where their strengths lie? Without having data associated with it, you're kind of left to chance saying, oh, somebody's joining. I hope they can do this part of a deal, or I hope they can build the practice in these ways. You don't need to guess at that. We've got tools, you've got plenty of tools, and I'm pointing out one to you because it's the one I developed and know best, that help you understand much more about how this person operates. Where are their strengths? How are they going to complement other people inside the practice? That will create pull for people in ways that are really profound. If you've done your homework and the whole practice group has taken one of these psychometric tools, the provider should be able to give you what we call a leader insights report or a group insights report. You'd know the distribution across the whole practice group of complex thinkers versus concrete thinkers. You'd know a lot more about people in that practice group. You'd know their risk propensity vis-a-vis clients. You'd know their preferences for working in a group or independently. And you would be able to coach the new joiner about whom they complement and whose style they match. This is taking integration to level 4.0, right? Level 1.0 is what happens now with classic onboarding. It's like show up, get your credentials, show up on a couple of webinars, tell people who you are, and then good luck. This is taking it to a whole new level. Who are you as a lawyer? Who are you as a business professional? And how do you fit into this group and add the most value? Boy, I have been talking a lot. Barry, do we have questions or do I need to take a pause here?
Well, I would like to ask a question. And actually going back, I mean, some of these things I kind of wish I were back and able to myself put them in place. But I'm thinking you were describing how laterals are much more successful when the legacy partners take the time to really understand the value they'll provide. And I'm wondering if there are some, I mean, and you're describing some tools that are provided, but I'm wondering in your work with law firms or other professional services firms, do you have any examples of specific programs or initiatives you've seen management put in place or perhaps marketing staff or others that have really helped facilitate the type of detailed planning that really you're describing as being necessary?
Yeah, absolutely, Barry. So we actually wrote a a short sort of a booklet. It's a paperback book published by Globe Law and Business Publishing. And it really lays out in a very step-by-step way how law firms can go about doing that. And it starts exactly like you're saying with planning, and it starts way before the offer is made. You know, a lot of firms, when they think about lateral hiring, they think about the kind of process of actually finding an individual to fill a gap, and then interviewing them and wooing them and schmoozing them and bringing them on board. Like, they think about that. What we draw attention to in our research is everything that happens sort of long before you actually go to market and start trying to find an individual. It's scrutinizing the business plans to understand where the gap is and comparing it. What you got is the sort of connecting the dots and finding where the gaps are between what your offering is and what the clients, not only what they need now, but what they will need. So when you're thinking about some of the transformative shifts that are happening in different sectors, you know, I mentioned energy transformation. It's on my mind because I'm working with a big energy company right now. But, you know, think about, you know, the digital revolution that's going on. What is changing in your clients, whether they're retailers or hospitals or, you know, you name it? What's happening inside their organization, and what will continue to change such that they're going to have to make these digital divide leaps forward? What kinds of lawyers are you going to need? What kinds of professional staff are you going to need to be able to get lawyers thinking about these? So anticipating future needs of clients and then figuring out what kinds of skills and capabilities you need, that's really a crucial starting point. And then when you start to zero in on which individuals will we be bringing in, creating extremely detailed plans at the client level. So not just generally, here's an employment lawyer who handles these sorts of issues and could go out to, you know, biotech companies, but which are the 11 biotechs that you serve right now, and what specific issues do they have such that this person will be welcomed to the table to have a conversation. I mean, it's at that level of tactical person to account planning that is absolutely crucial. And we just don't see firms making enough effort to make it as detailed and concrete as possible, Barry. I think that level of concreteness and the specificity, taking it to that whole new level of engaging people and getting everyone committed, the legacy and the new partner committed. Does that make sense, Barry?
Yeah, that helps. I mean, the what I see often is the planning process has one cadence, and very often the merger or the lateral group that comes in doesn't necessarily fall in line. But what you seem to be saying is it's helpful to revisit plans in anticipation. You know, don't wait until the lateral's there, and especially don't wait for the planning process to start, but before they start, revisit the plans that are already in place and perhaps modify them.
Yeah, it's crucial, Barry, because, you know, our research and so many other people suggest that an individual has about 6 months. And I will tell you, in some managing partner roundtables I've done recently, they laugh. They're like, 6 months? Yeah, right. I wish. It's more like 2 or 3. Right. So if somebody has, call it somewhere between 8 weeks and 6 months to make both of those kinds of collaboration happen. If you wait for them to get on board, it's a week or 2 until the machine starts to crank up. You've just lost potentially 25% of the time that they have. These plans have got to be in place, and people have to be hitting the ground on day one. You know, ideally, you will have not more than 1 day pass until somebody's meeting a client. Think about that. If you wait until they come in and have their badge to start making those plans, it's just not going to happen. Those plans have to be in place, and people have to hit the ground literally running. So those are some of our ideas for how to get your traditional lateral hires in, you know, people who have joined you from a competitor or from government or from, you know, possibly even from a corporate or a client even. But we want you to ask how it is that you attract a very different part of your talent pool, and that's by developing a boomerang strategy. So, do you know this term boomerang? You know, boomerangs are the people who have been in your firm, left, and now come back. So we write about this pretty extensively in our new book. We interviewed the head of Citibank's, the global head of their alumni program. And he's allowed us to use some stats in our book. He said that about 20% of Citi's current employees are boomerangs. They're people who worked for Citi at one point, they left for anywhere from a few months to some number of years, and now they're back. And what he told us is, on average, organizations, companies, I would suggest certainly law firms, save something like $50,000 per boomerang employee versus what they would spend hiring somebody who hasn't been part of their organization before. I think if you're working with legal recruiters, your fee is probably many times that much. And so think about it. If you can attract people back to your firm who have worked there previously, there's potentially very considerable cost savings. But that's not the real reason to do it. Think about what we were talking about earlier. Somebody needs to hit the ground running. How much more likely is it that if they left the firm, they were already well known, et cetera, inside the firm, they've had phenomenal experiences somewhere else, they've gotten to know a client from the inside out, they've gotten to know a different law firm and all of those clients in that firm, and now they're returning. Think about how much faster they can get integrated. Now, it's not quite as easy as it sounds, though. First of all, this hinges entirely on people being willing to return to your firm. So I guess I'd ask you, why is it that somebody is more or less likely to return to your firm? I spent 5 years at McKinsey, right? I was at McKinsey. I started in the New York office. I spent most of my time in London. I also spent a year in the Johannesburg office in South Africa. Across all of those offices, across the firm in general, we had very, very, very specific practices in place so that when people left, they left as a friend of the firm. Now, back in my day at McKinsey, this was like 1,000 years ago, we were doing that because so many of our clients were alumni of McKinsey. That's certainly a reason why you want to keep on very good terms with people who leave your firm. Now that the boomerang strategy has become so important in the war for talent, you also want people to leave as a friend of the firm because they aren't just leavers, they're future employees. So what do you do that makes it more or less likely that somebody's going to leave as a friend of the firm? Well, we've got some ideas here for bringing people back on board. One of the mistakes I hear is happening pretty frequently in the market is that when boomerangs join a firm, again, it's sort of a sink or swim mentality, perhaps even worse, because people are like, oh, hey, welcome back. You know how things work here, right? Go ahead, crack on with it. Right, so what we want to do is give you a few tools and ideas here for how to make sure that when you have somebody who's rejoined your firm, somebody who used to work there, they've gone away for whatever reason, and they're now realizing perhaps the grass wasn't greener like they thought it was, or they respect the firm a lot, they've kept in close contact with some of their former partners who are now their current partners. What do you have to do to make integration a success? Make sure that in your interviews, you're uncovering their new talents and documenting those. Those should be part of the stories you're going to tell about a boomerang. It's not just enough to say, hey, you know, Jessica's back, isn't it great? It's Jessica's back, and since you last worked with her, here are the 3 things that she is now doing which are new and valuable for us and our clients. So make sure you're uncovering those new talents and not just having people assume they know what the new joiner is good at. That plays into helping update one's image. I would say this is especially important if somebody left as an associate or senior associate and they're coming back either on the cusp of partnership or as a partner. Make sure that people understand how they have changed and matured and grown in the time that they were away. So help people update their image and make sure people are perceiving them in this new higher value way. Also, you know, invest in this update roadshow. And so I warned earlier about just doing the roadshow where people are kind of pushing themselves out there. But what the difference is with a Boomerang, they've got a lot of relationships. So they should be able to make the most of those road shows, so that if you say, okay, we're going to ask you to go to and give you the resources and the time to go to, 3 offices. When you're in Houston, make sure you do your homework and you're looking at people you previously knew, even if it was peripherally, making sure you're reconnecting with them and using them to help get you reintegrated into that market. The update roadshow here is really crucially important. People are going to want to hear oftentimes firsthand from somebody why it is that they're coming back. That's part of that trust building. I will say it's probably too common inside law firms and some other institutions. When somebody leaves, it's like, all right, you're dead to us. Yeah, that doesn't really make somebody want to come back. And if you had that mentality that somebody's left and they're now a traitor and they're with the enemy and all of the nonsense that people sometimes say, there's a lot of rebuilding trust that needs to happen. Right? And so we'd ask you to think about, how do you help people rebuild trust? And that's all part of what it takes in that update roadshow. All right, so the other piece that we mentioned, and I know not everyone has gone through a combination, so we left a little less time for this, because everyone, I think, is doing lateral hiring these days, but there are lots of combinations going on. So touching on now how to uncover smart collaboration opportunities both pre and post merger to make sure that that integration really happens, because the thesis, the investment thesis for combining is always that you're going to be much stronger together. You're going to be able to have complementary value propositions for the client, and that you're going to be able to do things better than pre-merger, right? That's the whole thesis for going into something as complicated as a merger or a lift out. But how do you make sure you tap into those opportunities? I just love, this quote. A genius is just a talented person who does his or her homework. Are you doing the homework that it takes? Conduct due diligence on collaborative outcomes and culture. Too often what we see is, not if you get a brilliant, there are a couple of consultants out there who are really genuinely top class and have had successes under their belt that speak to the effort they put into doing this kind of due diligence. Unfortunately, not everyone does. A lot of it is still too financial and mechanical in terms of, it's as if you're putting Lego bricks together. That's not what we're talking about. Yes, those Lego bricks might fit together, but you end up with something that isn't truly generative and with the sort of synergies you want, because the people who are joining don't have that collaborative mindset and culture. If you're thinking about bringing people on board, you have to understand how they are thinking about integrating across the legacy groups. A long time ago, one of my colleagues at Penn State University, Forrest Briscoe, he wrote a paper examining in law firms the difference between success and unsuccessful mergers. And what he found is that groups that were able to reach out very early on, it's very similar to the hiring process we talked about, but very early on, not just reach out and make some connections, but to sort of break some of the connectivity so that they didn't become very insular groups. And they had lots of ways about going about doing this, but it's crucial that you pay attention to how receptive groups are, not just to reaching out and pulling other people into the work that they're doing, but making sure that they are becoming crucial elements of the ongoing work in the legacy clients. And so you have to have those explicit conversations. What do they intend to do? How receptive are they to making those kinds of transitions? What we're talking about here, doing your homework, is trying to figure out ahead of time how receptive people are.
Heidi,
So,
if I could pause you just for a moment, culture seems really subjective. How do you effectively do due diligence on the collaborative culture of a potential lateral group?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are talking about, say, a lift out, a group of people who are coming to your firm, so you're not acquiring and merging with a whole firm, but you're saying, it's a group of, 5, 8, 12 people, what you want to know is, first of all, why they're leaving the firm that they're leaving, right? You have to understand what it is. Are they seeking to join a firm where they can get more deeply embedded? Or are they leaving for some other kind of reason, for example, something around, pay? And if it's something as frankly self-centered as simply what they can get out of it and not how they are going to add value by joining forces with a different group and other skill sets and capabilities, the intentions and the motivation for moving is a really important one. Collaborative culture, there are ways to do culture audits, and we could probably have another conversation just about that. But there's some data underlying this. What you can ask is how many of the clients that they serve are served not just by people in the group that's joining you, but across other groups. Now that's
Right.
tricky because the more embedded that group is in the firm that they're leaving, the harder it is for them to be able to bring clients with them. So,
Right.
they tend not to want to have those conversations. But if you're bringing a group that is fully intact and isolated in its prior firm, the chances are high that they're going to stay pretty isolated in your firm as well. They haven't got the muscle memory. They haven't got the capabilities, maybe not even the motivation to open up client relationships. And so you can collect data on this and examine what's the history of their collaborative patterns. And if they don't have any collaborative patterns to share with you, that's a super big red flag.
Yeah. I mean, I never thought about the fact that there is that kind of balance with a group because they need to be able to leave the firm, but you want them to be collaborative, which would make them more sticky at the firm, and there is that tension. But
Absolutely.
what I'm hearing is it's critical to ask good questions to make sure you understand the why for them leaving beyond just money, that you can see how they fit. And perhaps the ideal situation is where one of their whys is they're very collaborative, and perhaps their firm wasn't as collaborative as they want.
Absolutely. Some research that was done quite a long time ago by Boris Groysberg, one of my Harvard Business School colleagues, showed that laterals are oftentimes very successful when they're moving from something like a boutique to a full service firm, because it allows them to take their, labor and employment or their IP litigation expertise or whatever, and build that into a fuller service proposition, so that they're
Interesting.
no longer doing just one stage of a deal or one stage of a certain kind of process, but they're really embedded in a more fulsome legal process or business process. And people who have the motivation to join up so that they can be part of a business solution and not just plugged in as a legal subject matter expert, those are often really great reasons for people leaving.
Interesting. So the research supports what kind of is intuitively true, which is if they haven't had the opportunity to collaborate, moving somewhere where they do have that opportunity is actually a really, it portends well for the opportunity to work out.
Absolutely. So Barry, you know me well enough to know right now, none of what I am saying right now is based on hearsay or anecdote or an N of one, right? So, if I'm saying it out loud, like here's a good idea, I guarantee you there's some research backing me up. And yes, absolutely, trying to do that culture audit is really crucial. We had the opportunity to work with a huge organization. You probably know them well, CVS Health. We did some research with them on what helped to make that merger so successful. And it was a bear of a merger for a whole lot of reasons. The regulators were crawling all over this. And just as CVS and Aetna got the green light from the regulators to move ahead, there was this small thing called a global pandemic that hit. And of course, being on the healthcare front, they were in the absolute thick of things. This was the largest healthcare sector merger in US history. It catapulted CVS Health into the number 5 spot in the Fortune 500, $70 billion transaction. And within a matter of months, they had to be out there on the front lines figuring out how to do unprecedented things like run testing sites, et cetera, right? So this is not just a gigantic merger. This is under the scrutiny of regulators and the biggest crisis that it hits the healthcare sector in a very long time. So here are some things that we learned from doing this research that actually are applicable if you're thinking about bringing on, 5, 8, 10 lawyers or even merging with another firm. It can be done. One thing is these two companies knew each other very well pre-merger. I think it's worth, again, this is from the land of the obvious, but I think it's worth saying that the more that people know each other on a personal level, they have worked together on deals, they've sat across from each other at the negotiating table, maybe they've even teamed up at different parts of a transaction, for example. The more partners and leaders know each other, the more likely they are to have a very strong intuition about what we just talked about, the collaborative history of these organizations, and they should pay a lot of attention to that. During stage one, which was the sort of pre-merger formalizing this, when not a lot of people knew, there were a lot of constraints on who was allowed to know about it. It was still kind of under the cone of silence, but both sides were meeting weekly and they had a very structured approach to how they were working through trying to make mutual assessments of one another to decide if this thing were to actually get regulatory approval, what would they do and how are they going to make it work? There was so much planning in place. So, two other points. One is they named leaders early. Now, this is pretty controversial and I think counterintuitive for a lot of people in the law firm world who tend to keep decisions close to the vest until they spring them on people. CVS Aetna merger decided to do something very different. The leaders made clear decisions. If there was duplication, they've got 2 people running a division, 2 people running a department. Who's going to stay? Who's going to be the leader and who isn't? And they made those people, they made decisions, database decisions, very robust, comprehensive decision-making process. And once they had made the decisions, they were transparent about those decisions, first with those people and then with the broader organization. It's risky because you have the possibility that whoever sort of didn't win the horse race leaves, and you probably need their support through, big parts of the merger. And yet, it's fair for people, so it shows a really strong sense of ethics. But even more than that, not more than that, in addition to that, it helps to prevent some of the politics and the nonsense, the garbage that goes on in a post-merger situation. I have seen this way too often, back even at my time at McKinsey when we were working on post-merger situations, there would be these camps, these factions that formed around, is it person A or person B who's going to be our new boss, and all of the politics that go on and the angst and so forth. By announcing leaders and naming them early, it takes away a lot of the gamesmanship that goes on, and it really allows people to focus. They might not like the decision, but they will have a lot more respect in the organization and they'll be able to crack on and get their work done. There is a long history of research in psychology demonstrating that when people perceive the process to be fair, they're more likely to accept an outcome that isn't favorable to them, right? So it's called procedural justice. If people believe that the process in getting to a decision was fair, equitable, just, then they pay less attention to the personal implications. We're not naive. We're not saying it doesn't matter, but they're more likely in a mature way to accept the outcome, even if it's unfavorable to them. So how do you, in all of the decisions that have to be made around a combination, how do you get some level of transparency and robustness into the process? And how do you communicate such that people understand that they can trust the leaders and trust the process? Naming leaders early is part of that. The leaders on both sides also made very explicit statements about collaboration. What are the expectations? How are they working together? What kinds of compromises did they need to make? And the integrity of the leaders in demonstrating why this merger made sense and how ultimately, in this case, the customers and the patients were going to benefit really added a lot of credence to the merger. And so I'd ask you, if you've got a combination that you're considering or that you've just completed, is everyone clear about what the clients get out of this? Why are they better off? Because ultimately, you've got to be able to convince clients, and that's a much more compelling set of reasons than just being able to talk about cost savings, synergy, et cetera. All right, so I know we're practically at time here, so I will just touch on this. But I want to bring up the idea that data and analytics are your friend. In a post-merger situation, you really need to be thinking about a dashboard that shows you things like employee satisfaction and retention. You need early warning signals of where there is turnover, regrettable turnover, people leaving in the wake. You have to know even earlier warning signals. How satisfied are people? Do they understand the rationale for the merger? Do they understand their place in it? Do they feel threatened by it, or do they see it as an opportunity? Getting the data there, and you can do very sophisticated ways of sentiment analysis using a lot of the analytics that are baked into processes you already use, like emails, et cetera. Or if you don't want to go that route, you can use pulse surveys and just get 3 questions out there on a biweekly basis. How are people feeling? It takes 30 seconds for them to answer, and really great data. You also want to be thinking about client satisfaction and spending. What's happening at the practice group level? Are you seeing early signs of people working across historic boundaries so that you have, the 2 legacy firms now joining up and thinking about how they're going to develop thought leadership and pitch material, et cetera? You need to have the data. You don't just want to be relying on intuition and hearing stories that this is going well. You have to have the data because you want to be able to see the trends over time. And of course, then the things you're probably keeping track of, like productivity and efficiency and some of the financial performance and billing statements, et cetera. Before you complete a merger, long before you complete a merger, you need to be thinking with your data scientists and your technologists how you're building out your data and analytics strategy so that post-merger you have transparency of data and you understand both the leading and the lagging indicators of how well the merger is working. All right, so let me just wrap up. Investing in smart collaboration pays off. And it pays off, so much of what we're talking about is investments you have to make even before you start the path of lateral hiring or combinations. And what we know is that it can be hard to get people to make these investments because costs will drop as people get more experience collaborating. But early on, all of the benefits, including employee retention and everything else you need to worry about in the wake of a combination or a lateral hiring, those benefits take time to accrue. So early on, you have to get people convinced that the ROI will be there. It's easy to understand where all the risks are. Do we really want to invest in building that data dashboard? Do we really want to invest in, like Barry said, revisiting all of the plans and trying to figure out how this is going to work and taking them down to the actual client level and mapping relationships and doing all of that work? You have to put that in. Over time, those lines will cross and it will be clear that the work you put in, the investments you made in smart collaboration are paying off. But your job as leaders and as professionals is to figure out what it will take to make those success stories real, happen sooner, and more widely known inside the organization. How do you quantify the successes, and how do you popularize and publicize them inside the firm so that people really understand why it is that you've really engaged in some smart moves to make smarter collaboration happening through your lateral hiring and your combination activities.
Well, thank you, Heidi. As always, you not only shared research-based insights, but you did it in an engaging way with actionable takeaways. I mean, the one that I'm going to take away and maybe apply it in the business side, since I'm no longer at a law firm, is that even before a lateral joins or a merger happens, there's work to be done, and in planning, in really thinking about the why and really looking at metrics. So we appreciate the insight. And thank you everyone for joining us on our first Smart Collaboration webinar. We'll be sending out the recording, and please also keep a lookout for the next two in the series. The workshop 2, I think, is September 20th and October 18th for workshop 3. Heidi, it's good to see you, and safe travels.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye, all.